Personally, I've had rather tough times since last year. One ish followed the other, snowballing ever bigger. I never considered myself particularly lucky or unlucky than others, but in such a situation, I couldn't help but thinking, am I cursed or what? Well, I've had it bad for just 1 year, but what is it for the individuals that seem to suffer certain type of bad luck and unfortunate accidents throughout their life? In the modern time, we are largely encouraged to make our own way and fortune, that we are beautiful as we are and don't let anything us down. But even the most rational and courageous one would not be able to dismiss a little suspicion entirely should one face the similar kind of unwitting misfortune again and again. Am I born under an unlucky star? Am I doomed? Today I collected 3 stories about people who seem to be born with unfortunate fate. One is explained as to be born with a tangled karma, the other with what Chinese astrology calls 살, an unfortunate or undesirable trait or tendency. And yet, it's all unclear in the end. Could there really be such a thing as a doomed fate? So, here are 3 allegedly true stories about people with a doomed fate. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by a host. Anthony. It's really not to boast about myself or anything, but I was considered a child genius when I was little. I could read before I could walk, if you'd believe me. A local newspaper even came to interview me once. My family was also fairly comfortable. We lived in a small town, but my family home was probably the grandest in the neighborhood. Dad was the captain of a big ocean-going ship based in Las Palmas, Spain, and earned handsomely if often absent. His pride and joy were 4 big dogs of Great Dane breed that he brought straight from Germany. The cage for them in the garden would have been the size of a small studio flat, so you get the picture. All in all, I must have been rather a lucky kid. When I was about 2 or 3, a Buddhist monk came by. Buddhist monks often go around door to door for a small donation. When Mom answered the door, the monk claimed it was an unlucky energy emanating from our home that led him there.
"Don't you have a little boy? If so, please understand I'm not saying this with any malicious intent, but the boy is doomed to die before he turns 5,
Monk said. My mom was angry for this outlandish claim, but got also worried and asked the monk what he could suggest to evade that doom. Monk suggested a sum of donation to his temple and that he would perform a little cleansing ritual. Dubious, but the sum he asked for was not too high, and Mom agreed for the sake of her only child, me. After the ritual, the monk said,
"Your boy should be now saved from the worst, but the karma he was born with is too strong that it'll be impossible to avoid all the hardships he may face in the future until he turns 40. At least all the issues won't be caused from within, meaning his health."
And when I turned 5. That day, my home was quiet. Mom was off to see her mom with her newborn, my younger brother, and Dad was glued to the TV to watch the football match. It was evening and getting dark. Dad, still glued to the TV screen, told me to go out and check if the gate was locked. My mom often forgot to lock it behind her. So I did just that. On the way from the gate to the house was the dog cage I mentioned earlier, behind tall bamboo fence. The Great Danes that evening behaved funny. They were agitated, fixated by something in the air, and howled long and sharp like wolves. "Shut up!" I grew up with the dogs, so I nonchalantly shouted at them. But right that moment, King, the leader of the 4 dogs, jumped over the fence, followed by the rest. They knocked me down on the ground and attacked me viciously. I don't remember everything clearly, but the attack created such a commotion that some passerbys noticed the situation too. But they couldn't do anything because one of the dogs made sure none dared jump over to rescue me. If you don't know, Great Dane is a big and, when they are in the mood, scary breed. The last thing I remember is me holding on to King's front leg and begging not to kill me. He seemed a bit taken back, but looked into the air as if there was somebody invisible giving him an instruction, howled long once again, and got back to bite me off. It was only when the first half of the football game was over that Dad came out to the garden. At first, he didn't even recognize the bloody mess of a boy there was his own son. When I woke up in the hospital, Mom was crying next to my bed. Doctor said it was a miracle that I survived and that I might have won the record of most stitches due to trauma. I felt itch at my thigh and wanted to scratch, but noticed the thigh was covered with a huge bandage entirely. I lifted it a bit out of curiosity and saw a whole chunk of my flesh missing there. Apparently, when I first arrived at the emergency, I was missing my left ear, and my left thigh bone was exposed. And since then, I had many an incident, big and small. So far, I had 8 operations that required general anesthesia. None of them were due to my own illness, but accidents. One time, a simple appendectomy developed a severe complication due to doctor's error and was told it was fatal. Or other time, I was surrounded by frantic doctors and nurses and heard my own electrocardiograph going erratic. Now, the short glory years as a child prodigy is long forgotten, and I'm just rather ordinary man looking frankly a bit less than ordinary, with lots of scars on my face and body from numerous accidents. I still don't want to believe there's such a thing as a doom. I know the monk's prediction was right all along, but the more so, the more I want to deny it. Winter 2012. I was 30 then, and just diagnosed with cerebral infarction. I was still young, but that was not the first time I had issues with my body. From head to neck to lung to arm to knee, always on my right side. This time too, it was my right brain that was dying away. Was it all a coincidence? What about the frequent accidents I experienced from an early age? Just as an example, when I was 5, I used to join Grandma on her way to her church. By the time we were back from the service, it was invariably in the dusk. Then one day, I was hit by a motorbike. Probably because I was young and flexible, I didn't get hurt too much. Then, in the following week, on the same way back from church, I was hit by the same motorbike. Coincidence? What is the chance of it happening in the 3rd week then? On the 4th week, I learned my lesson and made sure to walk well on the edge of the road. and fell into the gutter head first and almost died were it not for Granny promptly pulling me up by my feet. And that is just one example. My life had been riddled with accidents. A stone fell from nowhere, broke my right knee. My right lung collapsed while I was just quietly working at the desk. Occasions like I was almost drowned or beaten nearly to death by school colleagues are too numerous even to mention. But this time felt differently. So far, even in the worst cases, I always felt there was some force, a guardian angel for the lack of a better word, was there to save me at the last minute. But this time, even the guardian angel wouldn't be able to save my dying brain. I prepared myself for the end. I gave my notice to my work and still did my best to the last day to hand over my jobs smoothly. Strangely, I was more worried about leaving my girlfriend behind than my parents. She was really naive and ever-positive gal, and I worried how to let her down gently, and how she was going to deal with the cruel world when I be gone. I couldn't tell her about my diagnosis, nor I was preparing my end. One evening I met her. She was ever bright and ever smiley. After the usual date, I gave her a lift back home, but then thought, well, shouldn't I give her a drive around one more time, since she didn't drive? I called her again and suggested that we take our usual night drive route to the nearest beach. Time was already passing midnight. That night, the road was eerily empty. I didn't want music banging in my ear, so we drove in silence. Even normally chatty girlfriend was just fiddling her phone. The route must have been the same, but it felt strange. Had the navigation took us to a different road? Or was it the fog? Or was it my brain? But what disturbed me the most was the weird, metallic grating noise. The last section of the road to the beach is pretty straightforward. When I reached that straight stretch of the road, the fog dissipated and I could speed up a little. The grating noise returned. Maybe something was up with the car, but I decided to drive to the beach anyway. The midnight sea was under the veil of fog. Still, it was sea, and for once I became the bright and carefree one, walking up and down and making jokes like, "A ghost might pop out," while girlfriend quietly looked ahead over the water. She was behaving so different from the girl I've known for 10 years, but I guess I was too preoccupied to notice anything. The gusts from the winter sea was so cold that we couldn't stay there for a long time anyway. As I took the way back, grating noise returned. Should I bring the car to the garage tomorrow? Was the last normal thought I had. And the rest followed in an instant. I saw something ahead. Something was standing taller than the holiday cottage on the beach. A figure clad in black hooded cloak. It wasn't of this world. It wasn't something I could fight against or deal with. It was beyond anything I had ever imagined or saw in my worst nightmare. That I was terrified wouldn't cut it. I was overwhelmed. I was helpless. I was paralyzed. I couldn't even lift my foot off the accelerator, and my car just ran to that enormous presence. I could barely squeak to girlfriend through my parched throat, though what I wanted to say was, "Look at that!" The metallic grating got louder and more intense, and I saw girlfriend lifting her head from my peripheral vision. She pushed her head right up to my ear and said, "You saw it just now?" I couldn't even turn to look at her. Car was going to crush into that black force the next second, and the metallic grating was deafening. It was just then. A whitish figure that resembled a person jumped in onto the road from the side. I hit that figure, and only then I stepped on the brake. The dull thud of something hitting the car, sharp screech of the car stopping short. I just put my head over the wheel and cried. It wasn't something I could take. I couldn't see, hear, or say anything. No, rather, I didn't dare to see what should be awaiting for me. I cried and cried like a helpless little boy. What else could one do when one was seized by something so beyond comprehension? After crying like that for a long time, I finally picked myself up. I got off the car, wiping my tears. I looked around. There was nothing but the cold winter night air. Not that giant black thing on the road, nor that white figure that I hit. I walked all the way round and over the guardrail too. There was nothing. Finally, I came back to car. And there was nothing either. My girlfriend wasn't there. I moved the car to the shoulder and just shivered till the morning came. Even though I couldn't find any proof of crash, my car bore damage. The right side bumper, right side headlight, and the right side hood. Just like my body, only the right side was damaged. As for my girlfriend, she didn't join my nocturnal drive at all. She was home, deep in a sleep. I still don't understand anything of what happened that night. Was any of it true? All I know is I survived it, and I am still alive. This story is about a uni mate. I'll call him Kim here for the sake of the story. We first met in 2007 as fellow freshmen in the uni. Kim was, for the lack of better term, drop-dead gorgeous. Not just a face, but tall and well-proportioned. He could very well have been a movie star. Naturally, he got instantly famous in the whole campus. And as to prove the worth of his beauty, he proved himself to be quite a womanizer. He was rarely seen with the same girl longer than 2 weeks, and at times 2 different girls at the same time. I guess him living by himself away from home must have contributed to his unhinged lifestyle too. Soon, his fame in the uni turned to infamy. Many female colleagues were left broken-hearted, and many male colleagues were robbed of their girlfriends by Kim. Before the end of the first term, he disappeared from the campus altogether. Since by then he was universally disliked, I don't think many thought much of his disappearance, myself included. Near the end of the first summer vacation, I got a call from Kim. I was surprised because even though we hung around together occasionally at the beginning of the term, we were never quite close enough to make personal contact. And what little friendship there had been were now long gone since he developed his notoriety.
Hey, wouldn't you come around sometime and have a drink with me?
His voice was low. I didn't really feel like it, but guess my curiosity was still bigger. So I went to his flat. It took a long time till he opened the door. And all the while my imagination ran wild. What was taking him so long? Was he doing something with another girl inside, perhaps? Maybe I'd better just turn around. Kim that opened the door wasn't Kim I knew. He was gaunt and had dark shadows under his eyes. It took us good half a bottle before the awkward mood broke. I talked about his fallen reputation at the uni and asked directly why he contacted me now. But Kim's response wasn't what I expected.
I may die soon,
he said. At first I wondered if he got some terminal illness. Honestly, looking his current condition, the idea didn't seem too far-fetched. But his story was much further, deeper, and weirder. From the childhood, Kim was always popular. Looking like what he was, it was no wonder, I suppose. It wasn't uncommon some random passerby trying to flirt with him, and one time even a young female teacher tried to seduce him at high school. Thankfully, his parents kept a tight control over him. Indeed, as I remember him at the beginning of the term, his attire and manner were closer to that of a shy nerd than a reckless playboy that he became now. The point of the big change came, Kim explained, one evening when he went to drink with an acquaintance from his hometown. The acquaintance was older, had already settled in Seoul for a full-time job. The bar he took Kim to was definitely a sophisticated grown-ups place, unlike typical cheap beer halls frequented by uni students. But what struck him the most there was the bartender. She was beautiful. He was drop-dead gorgeous, and he himself was aware of it well, but her charm was irresistible even for him. Still a shy boy, he didn't dare to flirt in any way other than staring at her absent-mindedly. Then the bartender, as she went away to make their order, casually dropped, "How handsome." A compliment Kim had been hearing thousands of times, but from her lips, it felt like the first time, and his heart swelled. From that day on, Kim couldn't read of the bartender in his mind. He pestered his acquaintance to take him back to the bar again a few more times, and every time he couldn't take his eyes off of the bartender. The longing got only more desperate over time, and truly woke his desire up. One day he waited outside the bar till the bartender finished her shift, and just straight confessed his infatuation for her. But she only smirked and said, "You are nuts, you know," and went away. He suffered what felt like a very bad flu for 2 days. And when he got over from it, he felt something from within, something that he hadn't realized that he had in him. He lost his shyness and caution altogether and started hooking up with any girl that flirted with him. They were all casual and based on carnal pleasure only. Without the emotional and human connection, it only made him more thirsty. And to fill the gap, he opted more and more perverted ways of pleasure. Now I understand why some female colleagues didn't hide a sense of disgust as they talked about Kim. Nothing could quench his thirst. He even frequented cheap red light districts and didn't turn down all the women who could be his mother too. Kim started to feel scared of himself towards the end of the term. Something must be seriously wrong. So he went back to his parents. Kim confessed his deeds, and surprisingly, his dad didn't get angry or shouty, but only stared at him with a heavy gaze. Kim's dad is, apparently, rather famous fortune teller, and he knew very well that Kim was born with what fortune tellers call 도화살. The literal translation would be the doom of peach flowers. It basically signifies the inexplicable attraction and sexual pull. It may sound like good fortune, but it is nevertheless named a doom because people born with it often have to suffer uncalled for flirting and stalking from others, have a hard time to settle down in a stable relationship, and even sometimes consumed by their own uncontrollable sexual energy, bringing themselves and others around down with them. That's why the dad had been so strict with Kim's upbringing, to control his son's doomed trait. Initially, he didn't even want Kim to enter university, but he couldn't keep his now grown-up son's wings clipped forever, and reluctantly agreed him going to the university in Seoul. As a precaution, he hid a talisman among Kim's clothes. But now, he found they were all gone missing when he checked through Kim's clothes. Kim was bedridden for a full week back at his parents'. As soon as he got up, his dad urged him to go to Seoul together. Dad went through everything at Kim's flat, but the talismans were nowhere to be found there either. He suspected it had to be all to do with the bartender. Kim and Dad went to the bar themselves, but they said the beautiful bartender didn't work there anymore. She just stopped coming to work and didn't answer their call either. Apparently, it wasn't the first time either that she abruptly disappeared. Kim then turned to his old acquaintance, who introduced him to the bar. But he wouldn't pick his call nor replied to his messages. Without a further lead, Kim and his dad had to just wait in Kim's tiny studio flat. It was a full week later that Kim got a call from his acquaintance. Kim described his voice sounded stiffer and somewhat shadier than usual. But Kim was not in the position to care about such and insisted to meet him in person.
Okay, but you forgot to come by yourself. I'm not going to see you should you bring anybody else with you,
the acquaintance said, which was most bizarre because Kim never mentioned that his dad was with him. Following day, Kim waited for the acquaintance while his dad watched from across the street. Who turned up 30 minutes later than the agreed time was not the acquaintance, but the bartender. Kim didn't know how to respond and glanced over to his dad, but Dad was calmly watching. "Your friend is unwell, so I came on his behalf," she said, and tried to convince Kim to follow her to somewhere. Kim found the whole situation too weird and refused. Bartender snatched Kim's arm and said, "I told you to come by yourself, but tagged something weird with you along." It was then that Kim's dad yelled,
"Son,
Come over here! Quickly!
Kim managed to push the bartender away and ran across to his dad. He barely explained that it was the very bartender, and passed out. When he got around, his dad was holding Kim's hand with the teary eyes.
I'm sorry, son. I should have tried harder to save you from all this.
He then explained what he saw earlier, that Kim yelled into the air and made some desperate gestures all by himself.
I think you must be possessed by something. Something bad,
Dad said. Kim was confused. He did see the bartender and certainly didn't yell or made wild gestures. What was going on? According to Kim's dad, when a person born with a strong doom starts to see what others can't see, it means his days are numbered. Kim's dad urged him to give everything up in Seoul and come back home. But before Kim could do that, he got a call from his old acquaintance. Dad wasn't happy about it, but Kim couldn't just leave it behind unless he found some sort of explanation. He lied to his dad and sneaked out to meet the acquaintance. The acquaintance turned up visibly distressed. What he told Kim was, he'd been a regular to the bar and he'd been dating the bartender himself. One day, the bartender said out of blue, "You're going to meet a boy from your hometown soon, aren't you? Do take him to this bar, and before you do that, check the hem of his jeans. There you'll find a talisman. Take it out and bring it to me together with the boy." It was the most weird instruction, but by then the acquaintance was well in her hand, and faithfully he hung around Kim and visited his flat to go through Kim's clothes in search for the talisman. When later he realized the consequence of his action, he tried to contact and find the bartender himself, but it was all in vain. The story left Kim very upset. But since there was no other lead, he convinced the acquaintance that he didn't blame him, and he should let him know as soon as he got to contact the bartender again. A few days passed, and an unexpected visitor knocked on Kim's door. It was the bartender. She said the bar owner left her a message that Kim and his dad were looking for her. And the story she told Kim was confusing, to say the least. Kim's older acquaintance was indeed a frequent regular to the bar and flirted with her relentlessly. Men would usually brag about their wealth or prominent career to appeal to her, but he was a bit different. He claimed that he had the third eye. He could read face and palms, also often saw future in his dreams. He told her that he used his power to help his friends and family and guide them towards more prosperous direction. At first, the bartender thought him funny, but soon realized most of his passing comments and tips turned out to be true. One time he even predicted a trouble with a client and also told her how to resolve it, and it all turned out to be true too. She couldn't help but take him more seriously. One day he told her, "You are born with a strong doom of the peach flowers. Men all around you wouldn't leave you in peace, but I can help you if you want." It wasn't untrue that she was a bit tired of all the men trying to hook her up, and said, why not? And one day he came to the bar with a Kim, When Kim went to toilet, he handed her a folded piece of paper. A talisman, apparently, and nonchalantly instructed her to drop a little compliment to Kim later, like he was handsome or something of that kind. But then, when Kim started to obsess over her, she found it all too tiring, and so rejected Kim when he confessed his feeling for her. That was the reason she stopped working at the bar too. But what she said next was most shocking. I heard from my colleagues later that he, your acquaintance, chose to end his life. Kim couldn't believe it. He met the acquaintance just a few days ago. He looked pale and unwell, all right, but she was saying now he was long dead already? As for the talisman, I kept it until recently, but I can't find it anymore. I did put it away somewhere, but I can't remember, however hard I tried, as if that part of memory alone had been wiped out, bartender said. As soon as the bartender went, Kim contacted everybody he could to find about the acquaintance, and found, indeed, what bartender said was true. Hearing all this, Kim's dad despaired.
A half-baked fortune-teller tried to play a trick on my son, and is trying to take him with him even after death,
he said, and went back home, telling Kim to wrap up the life in Seoul as soon as possible. And before he left, Kim contacted me for the last time because I was by then about the only mate around him that didn't directly bad-mouth him. I kept just sparse contact with Kim afterwards, and now completely lost it. Well, that's already 8 years ago. I only hope he survived his ordeal and his doomed fate. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. I personally don't want to think myself as a fatalist, but then I still think a lot of traits, attitudes, and tendencies we are either born with or form at a very early age. And in that sense, I don't think it's fair to put one's success or unsuccess all on the person's will and work either. What do you think? Are we born under a certain destiny? If so, could we bend or overcome it at will? If you enjoyed my work, please give it a big thumbs up and a comment, and please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't yet. If you'd support me more directly, I have a Buy Me a Coffee account, the link's in the description, and there's also a super thanks option here on YouTube for a small donation. Thank you. Until the next, stay safe and take care.